Yeah, good morning, everybody. And well, like you've heard, Spanish nap after lunch, not now. So I'll try to keep you awake at least for the next hour or so. I know it was a long evening yesterday, and in this way, short night, also maybe a little bit tired still. So leading about culture, in principle I've structured the talk into 4 parts. The title has 2, main topics. You can say leading is one, and the other one culture. So we'll talk a little bit about what leadership means from my perspective. I mean, there are a number of different definitions, but I will also talk about culture, the importance of culture. I will talk a little bit about where I'm coming from, Corporate Development Center. Not only me, there are also a number of colleagues from our organization in that room. Hope it will also be interesting for you as well. And then a case study is the Corporate Development Center, how we implemented certain topics there, and then will close with some results and recommendations. Leadership, don't know anybody seen this guy on the right-hand side, penguins of Madagascar. You can just raise the arm who has seen this before. Oops, now it's gone. Here, who has seen this before? Okay, for those who haven't seen it, I mean, penguins from Madagascar, there are 4 guys. And they all are quite different characters, and this one is called Skipper. And I put him here because from my point of view, he's an excellent leader. He shows direction, and I mean, according to Wikipedia, leadership has been described as a process of social influence in which a person can enlist the aid and support of others in the accomplishment of a common task. So next time you watch Penguins of Madagascar, observe what Skipper is doing, and you will notice that this is exactly what he's trying to achieve. Some understand a leader simply as somebody whom people follow, or somebody who guides or directs others. And others define leadership as innovating, organizing a group of people to achieve a common goal. And in our context at Siemens Corporate Development Center, the way I understand leadership is about motivating, organizing a group of people to achieve a common goal. There are also a number of different, concepts or activities a leader can do. According to McKinsey, I mean, they came up with 20 different activities: be supportive, champion desired change, clarify objectives, rewards and consequences. I mean, I won't go through all these 20 because other studies also show if you look at it, there are 4 kinds of behaviors that account of, well, you could say almost 90% of leadership effectiveness. And those 4 are: be supportive, operate with strong result orientation, seek different perspectives, solve problems effectively. And those are the things which you should keep in mind when talking about leadership. A leader usually should be supportive. He operates with strong result orientation, focus on results, objectives, and also looks at the problems from different perspectives and tries to solve the problem effectively. So much about leadership, but it's also, to a large extent, optimism. So as a leader, you always should be optimistic. And I mean, for those who have seen presentations from me before, they know that I like Dilbert very much because somehow he really summarizes certain things in his cartoons. And here, the boss says, meet our new sourpuss. Well, I hear that every office has one, and we didn't, so I went out and got one. And then Dilbert says, does anything ever sound like a bad idea to you? And said, leadership is 90% optimism. So, but there's also some truth in it, because if you're leading an organization, especially in bad times, the one who is in front of the organization, he should at least to some extent be optimistic and try to get the things in the right direction. So much about leadership. Culture. I mean, culture topic we also have heard about a lot yesterday in some of the presentations. And there are a number of different definitions. Gerd Hoefner, for example, he says, culture is the collective programming of the mind which distinguishes the members of one human group from another. I'm using Hofstede here because there are different cultural models, and I personally prefer for characterizing cultures the one from Hofstede. We'll also explain you why. The Goethe Institute, they say a culture is a specific system of orientation which takes into account certain rules, norms, and mental attitudes. Me, being a computer scientist, what I like, it's the operating system of a society, and it defines the way society functions, and how Confucius put it, the nature of human beings is always the same. What disunites them are their customs. And culture is also often used as an excuse why things work, why things do not work. And one should be aware of certain characteristics of culture. Like, because from my point of view, culture can really not be used as an excuse that things do not work for a simple reason. I mean, it's of course particular to one group and not others. The values of a culture are shared to varying degrees by all members, influences the behavior of the group. But if you as a leader also understand the culture and the cultural differences, it helps you to make some predictions how people will react in routine situations and really steer the ship through also rough weather if you're familiar with the culture you interact with. The other thing is, culture is learned, which also means that if it's learned, it can be changed. I mean, there are a number of different prejudices towards certain cultures, and if I look at it, for example, when I came to India 13 years ago, people always told me in India, quality is not really highly appreciated, and many, many other things. Now, if I look at it today as an organization, when it comes to quality, especially code quality, we are among the best globally, which we also have proven through benchmarks with external companies. So don't listen necessarily what is said by other people. Look at it, be aware of the cultures, but as it is learned and passed down from generation to the next generation, you can also change the culture. And of course, it also includes systems of values. And the values describe accepted behavior in different cultures. And the accepted behavior in different culture, of course, is also different. If you look at this picture, my first personal encounter, so to say, with the Indian culture was in 1995, so 20 years ago. I was on a business trip in Singapore and had some spare time. I mean, the program was not as nice as here, but still, over the weekend, I also went to the quarter that is called Little India. And I went to a typical Indian restaurant where they serve the food on a banana leaf, like on this picture. Then the guy came with a bucket. He gave me some rice and then some curry and a spoon. So then I started eating. Then I looked across the table, and there was another guy sitting. He looked more like an Indian. And he had more or less the same dish like I had, but he ate with his fingers. Indian colleagues may excuse, but when I looked at him, well, it was to some extent a shock to me. When you see him like this and putting all the food with his fingers in the mouth. So I said, well, man, those guys are totally uneducated. And I thought about this because this is a behavior that is accepted in the Indian culture, but not in our culture. So it was a shock to some extent. But then after moving to India, I also told the same story to a friend of mine. And he said, you know, if you look at it from a different perspective, you guys in the Western world, when eating, you're missing something out. Because, well, if you look at it, God gave you certain senses. You can smell, you can hear, you can see, you can taste, but you can also feel. And when eating, I mean, you're using a fork. I mean, a fork is nothing than a piece of metal. And you're using a piece of metal where you pick up the food and put it into your mouth. But the quality of touching the food, yeah, feeling the consistency, you're totally missing out. That's one thing. Second thing, an Indian also will never burn his tongue. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, because you feel with the fingers how hot the food is. If you use fork and knife, you feel how hot it is once your tongue is burnt, and then it's usually too late. And in the meantime, I mean, I personally, if you ask me, 20 years ago, I was shocked seeing this. Now, honestly speaking, I prefer eating with the fingers. To some extent, it's also an art, especially, I mean, if you, let's say, wear a tie, something like that, how to use the fingers so that you don't spoil your shirt and the tie and thing, but it's possible, so if you're really experienced. But the point is, one really needs to be aware accepted behavior is different, but it doesn't mean it's good or bad. It also has usually certain history behind it. If you look at it traditionally, maybe I should ask the Indian colleagues if you're aware why eating with fingers, what is the history in India? Which I will tell the answer, but maybe there are more answers to it, but what somebody told me, sometimes one of the possible explanations is in the past when you were traveling, and if you went to, let's say, while you were traveling and you went to a restaurant or some guest house, if you get a fork or a knife and you don't know how it has been cleaned before or who used it before, there's a certain likelihood that if using, let's say, tools for eating, you can be transmitted a disease. If you have your fingers, you can wash the fingers and you know what you put in your mouth, it's clean, and you also know what you touched before, and so on and so forth. So it's really also, let's say, some kind of cleanliness which helps. And if I look at other Asian countries, for example, my cousin, she was based in Singapore for several years, and also Korea, and she, for that reason, when she went out in the evening, typically in the Asian restaurants, you always get these chopsticks, and she was always carrying her own chopsticks, and I asked her why, exactly for that reason. She said, if you're in a restaurant and you don't know how the chopsticks have been cleaned, it's one way to easily transmit, for example, hepatitis. So if you're traveling in Asia, carry your own chopsticks, or do it like the Indians, eat with your fingers. Okay, but accepted behavior is one thing, but also expectations. If you look at it, behavior is one thing. On the other side, what people expect in a certain culture, what we've analyzed, for example, and what you can see here, what attracts people to join a company. And here I've took two emerging economies, China, India, two mature economies, Germany and UK. And interestingly, in UK, number one is competitive salary. In Germany, number one, challenging work. Whereas in China and India, it's career advancement. And if you look at it, number two, China and India, the same learning development opportunities. Number three, India challenging work, China competitive benefits. Whereas in Germany and UK, number two, convenient work location, something which doesn't really matter. I mean, if I look at it, in India, our colleagues, I would say they travel at least an hour one way to come to the office, some even 1.5 to 2 hours one way every day. I can imagine in Istanbul probably it will also be not less than an hour if you use public transport. Whereas in Germany, convenient work location, I mean, I remember I was based in Erlangen in the early 19th, working in the Department for Energy and Automation. Our department was split into two separate organizations, and one had to move from Erlangen to Nuremberg. The distance is an amazing 35 kilometers, connected via a highway so that you can easily make it in 20 minutes. But for the German colleagues who had to move from Erlangen to Nuremberg, it was a major disaster. Yeah? That was like moving them to, well, not on the moon, but the moving in Erlangen, they all could go to the office by bike within 5 to 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden they had to go by car, by bus, whatever. but it was a major shock for them that they all of a sudden had to spend half an hour commuting to the office. And that also means when dealing with cultures, what you should be aware, number one, what are the accepted behaviors, and number two, what are the expectations in a society. And to understand this a little bit better, it also helps to look at certain models in terms of cultural behavior. And Gerd Hoefner, he came up in the 17th with an analysis of IBM as a company. He chose IBM and he interviewed more than 50,000 employees for the simple reason, he said, the national culture is individual to the respective country people live in, but the corporate culture should be the same across the globe. And he also distinguishes between a national culture and an organizational culture. Organizational culture is something which you can define. National culture is something you should be aware of the countries you deal with. And what he did is he introduced 6 different parameters. One, individualism versus collectivism. That means how far people in a society are more individualists or they work together in a group. How traditional oriented the culture is, long-term orientation versus short-term. What is the role of women in the society? Power distance, that describes how well it is accepted in a culture that power is distributed unequally, accepted also by those who do not have the power. Then indulgence versus restraint. This is something that was newly added, and this I have to read out because let me see what is the definition. Indulgence versus restraint stands for a society that allows relatively free gratification of basic and rational human drives related to enjoying life and having fun. Restraint stands for a society that suppresses gratification of needs and regulates it by means of strict social norms. This was added in 2010, the long-term orientation in 1991, and the initial model in principle only had individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus feminism, and power distance, and uncertainty avoidance. If you're interested in this topic, I also have the source here, gerd-hofstetter.com, so there you can read a little bit more about it. But I would like to elaborate a little bit more about this uncertainty avoidance. There are, let's say, so-called uncertainty avoiding cultures which minimize the possibilities of uncertain situations, which also means there is a belief in absolute truth. There can only be one truth, and we have it. Germany typically would be in this category. Also tend to say if you have an uncertainty avoiding culture, you introduce rules and everybody follows the rules. If you've ever been to Germany and you drive across the countryside road in the middle of the night and you come to a traffic light and it's red and you can overlook the crossing from a distance of 5 kilometers, but if it's red, then you stop. And you wait till it turns green, and if it hasn't turned green after 10 minutes, you probably call the police and ask if this traffic light doesn't work, because crossing a red traffic light is something which an average German usually wouldn't do, no matter what time of the day, no matter which locations. Whereas India, typical uncertain acceptance culture, I would say their red traffic light is usually a recommendation to stop. You not necessarily have to unless there is a policeman who may give you a fine, but otherwise, so you can also pass. And uncertain accepting cultures are more tolerant of opinions different from what they are used to, try to have as few rules as possible, and from a philosophic way, they are relativists, allow many currents to flow side by side. The picture which you see here, I've taken several years back when I was in Accra at a railway crossing. But you see here, I mean, railway crossing, the train is approaching, obviously, so the bars come down, but nobody cares. I mean, usually the vehicles, the cars also would have tried to cross, but at least they are protected by this bar. Anybody else, two-wheelers, pedestrians, they all will bow under the bar and walk. I mean, if the train is coming, I will see it, so no need, why should I stop? In Germany, well, people, they would stand, and I also explained to the colleagues in India, sometimes in Germany, if you have a railway crossing, sometimes you have bars that block only half of the road on each side. Would never work in India because everybody would zigzag till the train comes. Usually we also have, in addition to those bars, some kind of a fence down here to avoid situation what you can see here on this picture. So uncertainty avoidance is, from my point of view, one of the interesting parameters. And I've also put here some dimensions. I forgot to mention one thing. What Hofstede also introduced was a scale from 0 to 100 to characterize the different cultures. And if you have 0, for example, or the power distance, the lower the value, the lower the power distance. For example, Germany, the blue-gray color indicate a relatively low value, and the green ones mark the highest entrance in the respective dimension. So, for example, in Germany, power distance is relatively low, which also means people expect that they are all more or less being treated equally. And whereas countries like China, where you have a high power distance, it also means that, or India, it's similar, that you could say as a leader, the boss is the boss, so change in such kind of countries is easier because people simply, to a large extent, do what they are being told. In Germany, people will always question, why is this? And you have to explain. In China, for example, if it would be temperatures like here, 40 degrees, and you as a leader look out of the window and say it's snowing, people will say, yes, it's snowing because you're the boss, you're saying it, and you must be right, you have the power to define that it is snowing. Whereas in Germany, people at least will give you a hint, boss, well, 40 degree probability that it might be snowing is relatively low. So this is something which is important, similar the individualism. If you look at it, China, people primarily do something in groups, whereas United States, it's, well, probably the most individual country all over the world. Role of men, Japanese, highly masculine society. The other countries, I would say, the role of women and men are more or less equal if the value is around the 50s. Uncertainty avoidance, I mean, Japan has even more rules than Germany. Germany is 65, and people or countries with uncertainty acceptance cultures, China, India also to some extent. And understanding what is accepted behavior in a specific national culture, from my point of view, is the basis for any organizational culture, and its understanding is also a precondition for being able to lead across cultures. If you really understand how people in a certain environment, how they think, what motivates them, what they expect, but also what they accept. So this is really, let's say, the foundation. And accordingly, also the challenges in leadership, they vary across countries. So this is from a white paper, Challenges Leaders Face Around the World, the Center for Creative Leadership, which was published last year only. Again, here the green indicates a high value and the blue-gray the lowest value. That means if you look at it, they said 6 common challenges in leadership are developing managerial effectiveness, inspiring others, developing employees, leading a team, guiding change, managing internal stakeholders in politics. And if you operate as a leader in China, for example, what is important here, that you develop employees or develop the managerial effectiveness, whereas guiding change is not necessarily so important. Whereas if you're operating in Singapore, there it's quite important that you inspire others, but developing managerial effectiveness or guiding change are topics that are not so relevant. And for those of you who are interested to get a little bit more about that, the source is mentioned down here, so you can also read the things in detail. So, as a leader, when leading across cultures, 5 things I would ask you to keep in mind. And to keep it simple, I call it A, B, C, D, E. A, act. And I will talk about ACT, what we did in our organization. It's also expected not only to know what other people accept or what kind of expectations they have. As a leader, you should also act. Be optimistic, that is the B. C, communicate. D, differentiate between national cultures. And E, establish trust. A, B, C, D, E. So if you go home this evening, the only thing which you should keep in mind from the whole talk, in principle I could finish now, are those 5 points. But I will also tell you what we did as an organization specifically. And like I said, ABCDE is what leading across cultures in general and in our case study in special is all about. And before we come to the case study, let me explain you a little bit about Corporate Development Center. This is the organization from Siemens. We have a number of different so-called divisions: power and gas, wind power, renewables, energy management, building technology, mobility, digital factory, process industry, drives, healthcare. Then we have financial services, and here the power generation services. All of this is supported or controlled by the managing board. There are so-called corporate services and the corporate core. And the part of the corporate core is so-called corporate technology. Corporate technology is about 7,500 people doing a number of different things like research, intellectual property, and development services. And this is the Corporate Development Center. We are a little bit more than 4,000 people across 9 different countries. And we offer, you could say, smart shoring, covering the entire life cycle. Majority of our colleagues is in India. In Europe, we have 16%, India 80%. Europe, we are present in Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, and Turkey. And we also have a small office in Munich. US, it's primarily delegates. China, we are present in 2 locations, in Nanjing and Shanghai, and in India at 6 locations: Bangalore, Pune, Chennai, in Gurgaon, and in Noida. And what we do is offering complete product development, covering the entire life cycle from requirements engineering to maintenance. We work for more than 30 different business units, and today we are the #1 development partner within Siemens, accounting for roughly about 20% of Siemens' overall development. The roots of Corporate Development Center are from 2 companies that were competing in the past. So we have, in principle, you could say, a history that goes back till 1960. In 1960, a company called PSE, Program and Systems Engineering, was founded in Austria as a division of Siemens Austria. 1960, I mean, you may ask why Austria. At that point in time, Austria was still seen as a low-cost country, so to say. So at that point in time, labor was a little bit cheaper. Then, 30 years later, in 92, company was founded called Siemens Information Systems Limited in India. Initially, there were roughly about 100 people recruited in India, sent to Munich to support Siemens Nixdorf in Munich for development. Later on, they were sent back to India. And then, 2007, so a few years later, the Siemens board decided to create an organization called Siemens IT Solutions and Services, SIS. You may have heard about this organization. That was a, putting 3 legal entities together. That was Siemens Business Services with about 28,000 people. PSE, in the meantime, they also had grown to about 9,000 people. And at SISL, this organization had grown up to 7,000 people. So both were, you could say, really reasonable companies, IT service providers, and SIS together we were 42,000 people. And the software developing part of those companies, PSE and SISL, who were competing, they were put together into one organization called software practice. And the software practice at SIS were in total a little bit more than 9,000 people. And 1 year later, the Siemens board decided to split the software development organization at SIS into two parts. One for the internal business and one for the external business. The external business was carved out later on and sold to Atos. And the internal business was the basis for the Corporate Development Center, which was founded in 2009. And the two different units from PSE and SISL were two different regions. We had, on one hand, we had the region Asia and we had the regions Europe, but they more or less continued to work as competitors, but not as one organization, despite the fact that we were really, let's say, from a organizational point of view, in one unit. And I, by the way, as I've been based in India since 2002, became the head of the CTDC in India. Then the headquarters was in Germany, also for the development center. And then in 2011, we had to change the head at that point in time from the development center in Germany. He left Siemens, and then the board decided to move the headquarters to India. I was appointed as the head of the development center, based out of India, and but also continued to head the Indian operations. And what we did, we started a project in 2011, which we called Strategy 2017. Why 2017? We said we would like to have a 5-year strategy. Project started in 2011, and the implementation started in 2012. So this is in principle from 2012, 3 years have passed. But the idea is to have it, let's say, till 2017, the overall strategy. And this is what I would like to explain what we did. The challenges that we had in the beginning, 2011, we had competing teams. In Turkey, for example, in India, and other countries. And objective was we would like to be one team. Another topic, from a service provider mindset to a partner at eye level. If you look at it, the way we operated, I mean, to a large extent as an extended workbench. If you're a service provider, you're not necessarily really get complete responsibility. If you would like to get complete responsibility, you also need to prove the colleagues in the business unit that you are at least as good as they are. So that also requires some training development. Then the portfolio that we had, both organizations, I would say, was more or less opportunistic, where we said, okay, we try to grow the organization, and if you would like to grow, you'd better take anything you're being offered in terms of work, instead of really having a focused offering. Like I've mentioned before, limited scope, responsibility, complete ownership on the basis partner at an eye level. Then both organizations had a kind of a legacy footprint. And this is, let's say, from a historical point of view, if you look at it in Europe, for example, we had more than 15 different locations where we operated, and most of those locations had an under critical mass. Because historically, I've mentioned before, there was external business and internal business. So if you try to grow IT services in a country, also with external business, the way, or one way to do it is that you support the business with regular R&D work. It means at different locations, you establish a small team for R&D, and then you start with the external business in addition. But if you do that and then separate the internal business and the external business, what we did, it may lead to a situation where you have a suboptimal footprint, because then all of a sudden you only have the R&D organizations in the respective locations, which may be relatively small. So this is also something what we looked into. And on a more personal level, I mean, I myself, I'm in India, like I've mentioned before, since 13 years. So for many colleagues, despite the fact that I not necessarily look like an Indian, but for many colleagues within the Siemens community, I'm the Indian. And especially also the headquarter being in India for a global organization, I also had to make sure that I'm being accepted as the global head of the organization against the perception of being the Indian. This picture, by the way, there was in 2012. If you're interested, if you Google working conditions in Bangalore and German perspective, something like that, one of the links you will find, it was an article in the Spiegel Online where they interviewed me about how it is living and working in India. And this picture is one of the pictures that was mentioned in this article. This is usually in September. There is some kind of a puja, kind of a blessing where a priest comes to the office and does a ceremony, and usually what he does is he blesses all the working equipment in the office, the computers, the office per se. Usually you'd also do it at home, so for your working equipment. So it's a typical ceremony in Hinduism, what we do every September, or depending when this festival, it follows the moon, is. But if you are presented in that way in the newspapers, I mean, then of course the way people look at you or how they perceive is that you're not necessarily the German, but also the Indian, or to more extent the Indian than the German. And especially as I'm still wearing two hats. On one hand, I'm the global head, and I'm also the head of in addition, of the Indian organization. So I'm one of my direct reports in my role as the global head. So what I would like to show you when talking about leading across cultures, some of the results. And results, of course, I mean, as a leader, number one, you have to give direction. Direction you give with a mission and vision. And you have to act, initiate change. And I would like to focus on those three topics. What we did to create one team, what we did to become a partner at eye level, and what we did to achieve complete ownership. In principle, the initiatives we took for one team, and we took an initiative that is called One DC. And there's a thing for partner at eye level and complete ownership. We had initiatives in the area of people and operational excellence, but let me start with the mission. We said as a mission, we make Siemens more competitive by providing high quality development services across the whole product life cycle, and we deliver world-class competences at best cost position. There are three things that are important, and those are the things that are highlighted: high quality, world-class competences, best cost position. The vision statements, usually, I mean, if you look at it, it always sounds simple, said, okay, this is something you can write down in a few minutes, but this is something we elaborated quite some time. We also had a lot of discussions about cost. I mean, we are an internal service provider. We operate under a cost-plus model. It means we don't make profit. There were also ideas, for example, that colleagues said, okay, maybe vision, we should say we operate at the lowest cost. Well, I said lowest cost doesn't make sense, because lowest cost is not necessarily the optimal factor, because if you spend as less money as possible, it may fall back to on your feet at some point in time. So that's why we said, for example, best cost position is more important. The other thing is world-class competences. We also clearly said we are not satisfied with mediocrity. We really would like to be among the best in what we are doing, and you will also see some of the results. I already mentioned the whole topic of code quality management, where today we are the benchmark globally. And this is, of course, the competences, the basis for the high quality. As a vision, we said we are the professional development partner for Siemens businesses across all divisions. The rest, I mean, usually, honestly, I don't like visions where you have to read too many things. Vision should be crisp, short, everybody can keep it in mind. So in principle, we are the professional development partner. And the C in capital letters for a simple reason. There is no mandate within Siemens to work together with us. So the business units, I mean, they are more or less, you could say, independent businesses. They can decide with whom to cooperate with. And our idea is, of course, that they don't work together with external agencies, but If they look for a partner to work with, they only think about us. And here, I mean, it's a little bit explanation, what do you mean by being professional? So we demonstrate our professionalism by quickly, efficiently ramping up, managing offshore, nearshore teams, assuming full responsibility for specific complete development topics, benchmarking ourselves continuously to ensure that we are best in class and we are open to proving this at any time, proactively optimizing costs, set up, offering for the benefit of our customers, attracting the best people of Siemens and developing to Siemens their careers. So vision, what is important is we are the professional development partner. Then this was the start, vision, mission, and then we said, okay, what kind of initiatives for change? And what we do is every year, we sit together as the management team, we analyze where do we stand, and for the year, financial year, which in Siemens typically starts 1st of October till 30th of September, we define so-called focus topics, topics we will work on, which we report on a regular basis. And for one DC, for example, we said, okay, what is important is to drive the collaboration across teams and countries. And what we also have, we have a global, or we had an excellence award, which was initially only locally in India, and then we said, okay, let's roll it out globally as a global scheme. In terms of people excellence, we said we have to empower local teams and we have to have a stronger overall people development. In terms of operational excellence, we said define and roll out a global standard for trainings and increase the quality awareness. Now I will show you what we did specifically in those 6 different topics. In 1DC, drive collaborations through global practices. What we figured out is we have a number of topics we work at for different business units, and those topics are spread across different locations. And the objective of what we call a global practice is to foster cooperation, knowledge exchange between countries, harness the tacit knowledge by enabling collaboration across countries to further strengthen the competences, and create a global repository of useful know-how to improve the day-to-day operations activities of our teams. So for example, in the Digital Factory, there is a product that is called TIA Portal, Totally Integrated Automation Portal, which is being developed in Austria, Czech Republic, India, Slovakia, and Turkey. And we started a global practice for TIA, which is also led by a colleague from, I think it's even in Turkey, if I'm in Turkey, right? It's in Turkey. And then we have a specific process how they work together, submission of entries and so on and so forth. So for every specific global practice. And it's really, let's say, to create a community in our organization around this topic. And in the same way, we created, let's say, also for other topics, a number of different global practices, really to have, let's say, one identity across those organizations. Another topic is we have the Excellence Awards. The scheme is like you have individual prizes for example, performance, expertise, project teams for quality, best cost position, or also impact on the partner's performance. So in total, we have roughly about 20 different awards. And the scheme is like, there are self-nominations along clearly defined criteria. Usually it's announced in August, and then the colleagues have time for about 2-3 months till October to nominate themselves or nominate some colleagues. And then we have a jury comprising of senior managers from our organization and the business units. They do the evaluations, and the top 3 entries per category are being invited with one family member to the Excellence Awards nights, which usually takes place the last Wednesday every February at a 5-star hotel where we have a big gala event and then announce the winners and later on celebrate. So the function starts at 6 o'clock in the evening, roughly about 2 hours, the award ceremony with some entertainment program, and then from 8 till midnight we celebrate. And this is an event which this is, by the way, also the award which people are getting where colleagues from all countries are being invited, and also all countries in principle, they can nominate themselves their projects for the respective awards program. That was one DC. People excellence, I said we have to look at a stronger overall people development management. And what we defined initially in India, that is something what we called 4C. The 4C, they stand for compensation, culture, career opportunities, and content, meaning the work content. For the male audience, if you would like to impress your wife, you could also tell them that you know what 4C stands for, besides CTDC's definition. Because 4C also characterize a diamond. So a diamond is characterized by carrot, color, clarity, and cut. It's also 4C. So typically, if you Google 4C today, you will find the diamond. Hopefully, in a few years, you will find the development center as the characteristics. And what we worked on, that we said, okay, we offer market competition salaries. We have opportunities for learning and growth. Work content is at a relatively high level, exposure to technology, challenging assignments. And culture, from my point of view, is the most important one, a fair and rewarding work environment. There's also the saying from Peter Drucker, culture, it's strategy for breakfast. And so this is a topic which initially we defined in India, then we analyzed it also with the European countries, and then we tried to roll it out in principle across DC. I don't know, it would be interesting to see if you've noticed something in Turkey as well. We can discuss over coffee, but this is the basic idea that we really have, let's say, this kind of concept where we say our philosophy is that our people are our core asset where we have to take care of, and then ensure that especially the culture is something where people enjoy being there. Another topic what we said in terms of people excellence, we said empower the local teams. And what we did is, for example, from an employee satisfaction survey, we identified certain areas for improvement. Those areas were local leadership, collaboration, retention. And what you see here, for example, in Austria, obviously, there were no issues with retention. Those numbers here, they indicate the initiatives per improvement area in a specific country. For example, in terms of collaboration in Austria, we came up with 2 initiatives, in Czech Republic with 1, in India with 3, Romania 3, and Turkey with 6. So if you look at this, for example, retention played a role in India and in Turkey, but not in Romania or the other countries. And to give you an idea what we did, for example, in India, to improve local leadership, one of the criticisms was that people do not really know in terms of communication of the program, of the progress of implementation, of actions related to the employee satisfaction survey. We said, okay, on a quarterly basis, we will have a CEO newsletter where we inform the people about what is going on. In Europe, we also said Europe, the whole setup was highly centralized. So that was, let's say, the old approach, like, let's say, in the 18th, 19th century, everything was rooted through Austria, Vienna, and the countries didn't have, let's say, direct contact with the business units. We removed this scheme and introduced a decentralized value flow so that now all countries directly interact with the respective business units and empowered more or less the local teams. Operational excellence, I also said that we would like to roll out a training program across the organization. Topics that we introduced, I mean, one is the training for software engineering, specific training for FOCUS stands for Foundation Curriculum for Software Engineers, which is a 10-day training program, which you could say a small bachelor for software engineering. And on top of this, advanced programs. But in addition, beside purely the technology focus, we also said other competencies are for a complete software engineer important, like project management and quality, domain competence, and behavioral skills about culture, knowledge about culture, leadership, communication skills, and presentations. And in the end, I mean, practice, practice, practice. The colleagues you see here is one of our internal dance teams in the organization. We made it mandatory to have 10 days of training per year for each and every employee. So learning doesn't stop with 30, it also doesn't stop once you've finished your 10 days focus program. Each and every year you should at least have 10 days of training to continuously improve and achieve operational excellence. Operational excellence, quality awareness, we also said, I mean, quality is one of the 3 topics from our mission: high quality, world-class competencies, best cost. There we said, okay, we should also have, let's say, more awareness across the organization. We said that we will have a stronger involvement of the management team in all quality-related activities. We have an intensified communication. We have quarterly newsletter called Q4U, Quality for You. We introduced the web portal. We have regular topics in town hall meeting. We've also events like what you see here, Quest 2015. This is a quality initiative celebrating quality in India, which we will have on 31st of July, so by the end of this month. But before this, you can see here there are a number of different events preparing the teams, also sensitizing them about quality, like we're making a movie on quality. We have quality-related puzzles, quality clips, and so on and so forth. So this is something that quality really becomes a habit in the organization. And like I've mentioned before, we have this excellence awards in terms of people excellence. We also introduced an excellence award specifically for quality, what we did not have before. So those were the topics that we implemented. Now let me summarize results and a few recommendations. I mentioned the ABCDE. I won't say anything about the A, ACT. I mean, ACT, this is what you've seen, what we've implemented. B, I will explain a little bit about in the end, in my last slide. Let me talk about the C, communication. Communication is something, do not underestimate the desire for information, and there's never too much of information being conveyed. People really would like to know what is going on, especially in times of change. And what we did is, I mean, or what I do usually, I have town hall meetings every year in every country. In January, for example, I was in Istanbul. In April, we had a town hall meeting in Prague. In August, we will have one in Bangalore as well as in Brasov in Romania, so that at least once a year as a management team, we address the people in person in town hall meetings. We have a kind of an internal internet or so Facebook, which is called Connect DC. This is this picture that you hear, Get Connected, Connect CTDC. We have an internal magazine. We have regular lunch with the boss meetings where I meet once a month 10 to 15 people without a structured agenda. It's simply to get some feedback, how things are going, if there are some concerns, and followed by lunch. Quarterly CEO newsletter, management meetings in different countries, colloquiums, and so on and so forth. So we introduced a whole number of different communication-specific events so that people really know what is going on one side, but on the other hand, also as a management team, that we get the feedback from the colleagues how the situation is in the organization. Another topic, the E, empowerment. Empowerment also means establish trust, and like Dilbert the boss says, every employee will wear a button that says, I'm empowered. And Ashok, who by the way is the Indian in Dilbert's team, he says, I don't want to, but the boss says you have to. So that was everything you need to know about life in one package. So this is not really empowerment. But our philosophy is in principle that every individual in the organization is the CEO of her or his area of responsibility. We also introduced KPIs for setting the targets that we derive from our focus topics. The KPIs usually are assigned to different individuals, at least 2, and each individual has between 3 to 5 KPIs, and we report it on a monthly basis. But to empower the people, to establish trust from my point of view is also something which is quite important if you're running an organization across countries. What we also said, I mean, initially I talked about having a national culture and on the other hand, an organizational culture. And in terms of organizational culture, we also thought about we as the development center, what would we like to stand for? And if you look at it, I mean, there are Siemens values. Siemens has 3 values: responsible, excellence, innovative. And based upon that, Siemens also came up with what it calls ownership culture. And we also said, okay, what does it mean for us? Ownership culture, we said we do what it takes without compromising Siemens values. What is also important for us, if you recall our mission, world-class competences, excellence. The core of our organization are people, then communication and leadership. And we said in terms of excellence, we excel at what we do, leadership, we shape the future, people, we nurture a motivating environment, and communication, we communicate with respect and trust. And all this kind of principles we also described in more detail. For example, when we say we nurture a motivating environment, we said, okay, what is important? We care for our people, we have fun at work, and we celebrate success. And this is something which is, let's say, not yet fully rolled out. It's still at work, and plan is to roll it out in the next quarter. Also to have, let's say, detailed description. What does it mean? We have fun at work, we celebrate success. So that, but this, the star in the middle with those 5 principles, ownership, excellence, people, leadership, and communication, is our culture, a performance-oriented culture for the development center across all countries. Otherwise, in terms of growth, we managed a significant double-digit growth year on year. Our approach, what you have seen before, has been recognized within Siemens as well as by the international community. Last year, for example, I don't know if anybody knows this gentleman in the back. This is Michael Porter. So the father, you could say, of marketing and strategy. We won the Porter Prize from the Institute of Competitive for leveraging unique activities. And last month, we also won from the Indian Merchants Chamber the award for being the best captive unit in India. And we are, in the meantime, best in class in the categories Net Promoter Score. Anybody aware what Net Promoter Score is? Okay, I will talk about it later. Retention, code quality management, software engineering related trainings. Code quality management and software engineering related trainings, there was a benchmarking with a number of external companies across the world, from Europe, from Asia, from America. Due to non-disclosure agreements, all parties who participated in the quality benchmarking, I can't mention all the companies, but there are very, very well-known companies. But anyway, one of the findings from this benchmarking was that we are today, as the development center, best in class for code quality management and the software engineering related trainings. Retention, our attrition rate is in India 5%. Industry average is between 12 to 14. So, and if I look at other countries, I think in Turkey we are around 6 to 7%, which is also a little bit better, I think, than the industry average. But overall, retention, you can really say no matter which country we are in, we are best in class. And Net Promoter Score, this is what you usually use to measure the customer satisfaction. Net Promoter Score is one question which you ask. Question is, how likely is that you would recommend our services to others? And you get an answer on a scale from 0 to 10, and then you classify the answers. Rating from 0 means I will never recommend you. 10 is I will always recommend you, so to say. The ratings from 0 to 6 you call detractors, and the ratings 7, 8 are fence-sitters, and 9 and 10 are your promoters. That means, for example, if you ask 100 people, and out of this, let's say 20 give you a rating of 6, which on a scale from 0 to 10, I would say is not really bad. Then 10 give you a rating of 8, and the remaining 70 give you a rating of 9 or 10. So then your Net Promoter Score would be the numbers percentage-wise of promoters minus the detractors. So we had 70% promoters, 20% the 6 rating detractors, and the fence sitters 7-8 rating, they are not counted. So that means in this specific case, our net promoter score would be 750. Yep. As simple as that. So it's a simple question which you ask your customers. We have about globally running 350 projects. We do this twice a year. So the numbers of inputs we are getting from our business units are 700 feedback forms, which I would say is a statistically significant number. And our net promoter score today is at 91. Many people say you guys must be cheating because this is impossible. We probably have one advantage. The advantage is that we are an internal service provider and that we have a good relationship to our customers. But even if you, let's say, remove 20% goodwill from the colleagues, typically for IT service industry, if you have a net promoter score of around 70, you are among the best, clearly. So those are the results, our achievements. But most importantly, I would say, we managed to become 1DC. And this picture is taken from our CTDC Excellence Awards, the celebration, the winners which you can see here. And if you look at the picture, I mean, that was taken in India, but I would say almost 30% of the colleagues over there, they are from Austria. Then we also have colleagues from other countries. Well, here we've also, this is from Turkey, right? And if you really look at the pictures, it's, let's say, colleagues, well, here also the colleague from Turkey. So it's really, in the meantime, a global community as one organization. So let me summarize. When leading across cultures, keep A, B, C, D, E in mind, what I've mentioned in the beginning. A, act, what we have implemented. B, be optimistic. C, communicate to your people. Differentiate between the different cultures. A one-size-fits-all approach across all countries definitely won't work. And establish trust. And in case hurdles are in front of you, which will always happen whenever you implement change, whenever you are leading across cultures, remember to be optimistic. Don't know if somebody has seen the movie Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. And there was one quote which I like very much. I mean, for those who haven't seen the movies, it's about some people from the US and UK. They have retired, and they are looking for a place where life is affordable in terms of cost, so they move to India and move into this Best Exotic Marigold Hotel because the advertisements for those hotels are really very good. And then they go there and they figure out, in principle, nothing is working really in this hotel. And one day they meet with the general manager and complain to him about this, and what he says, everything will be all right in the end, so if it's not all right, it's not yet the end. But this is the end of the talk. Remember to be optimistic, and if you have any questions, I think we still have some time.
Between 0 and 10, I will rate you like a 100 or something like that. Because you are brilliant and your talk was brilliant.
Thanks a lot.
We have time for some questions.
Yeah, so I was curious. You showed the Hofstadter factors, and they played a big role in the beginning of your talk. And then I was thinking, if you ever had yourself in a situation where you were giving direction to two teams from different cultures, and did you change the directions or instructions you gave based on things like optimism or risk aversion and things like that? Was that like an explicit factor in your thinking? Did that make sense?
You have to adjust. I mean, before I came to India, I was based 2 years in Italy. And we had acquired a company in Italy, and my job was to integrate this Italian company, medium-sized company, into the huge Siemens organization. The headquarters of the respective business unit was in Nuremberg. So when I talk to the colleagues, let's say in Italy, for example, I use a completely different kind of motivation compared to the colleagues in Germany, because the Germans, I mean, they, I would say they don't like too much of optimism. I mean, we are usually always fact-oriented, but also would really know all the details, whereas in Italy, things work a little bit differently. So you have to adjust really when talking to different cultures.
Okay.
And as you mentioned, Hofstede, I mean, Hofstede is only one model. I mean, you also have Lewis and many, many other cultural models. My intention was not necessarily to sell the Hofstede model, but to create awareness about cultural differences. If you Google, for example, cultural models, you will find 5, 6 different models. There's also, for example, a book, Leading Across Cultures, When Cultures Collide, for example, from Lewis, yeah, where you have, let's say, certain parameters if you would like to get a quick overview on national cultures in terms of how they behave, in concepts like communication, time, how to motivate. On almost all countries, he has in his book 3, 4, 5 pages where you can a quick glance about the specific national culture. So there are a number of different models which help in the end, but what is important in the end is really to be aware of those cultural differences. Yeah, in the back.
No, I've lost my page. Okay, I better remember it. I just wanted to say on the masculinism versus the feminism. Yeah. It's not really about women and men. It's about male characteristics versus female characteristics. Yep. So the expectation is that in an organization, if you've got male characteristics, that it might be more career-oriented, money-oriented, whereas for women, relationships and physical environment is important. So I just think that's an important clarification. Yep. Lest people think that women are doing much better in Germany and the UK than they are in Japan. I'd hate people to go away with that. But what really struck me about those across your presentation is that there seems to be a place where I would like to work as a woman, I think. That, you know, the photos are happy and smiling. Now, obviously, you've taken those from award ceremonies. But I suppose, could you comment really on the gender and the involvement of women within the organisation? Because certainly you portray that is, from my point of view, a very positive aspect of the organisation.
It is. I mean, if you look at it, we have roughly about 30% of our population are female colleagues, and we are also trying to increase it further. Because I mean, in management, if you look at it, we have probably less than 30% at the moment in leading positions, but this is also something where I still feel we have room for improvement. I mean, nobody's perfect, and those are the topics we definitely are working on it as well.
For excellent talk, and my question is about dimensions, cultural dimensions, and more exactly if there are dependencies between them. For example, if you take power distance and level of uncertainty, if you have very low level of uncertainty that they can live, you probably need a huge power distance, otherwise they are not following the rules.
Not necessarily. I mean, yeah. This is the way, if you look at it, why Hofstede chose those initially 4 parameters, because he felt that this is what you can use to characterize a culture. And what I've understood is that they are more or less independent, because otherwise, if you could derive the information from one factor, then the information about the other, then you would not need the other one explicitly.
No, but still dependency can exist.
It can exist, but it not necessarily has to. Yeah. If you look at it, I mean, I think in total he looked at more than 100 different countries. You will have certain countries where you feel that there is a relationship maybe between power distance and uncertainty avoidance, and in other countries there is not. Yeah. Okay, I don't say that it can't. It can exist, but there is not necessarily a direct correlation.
Okay, but concerning India, you showed that uncertainty level is very low, yeah. Right? So they don't abide the rules. And you want to promote collaboration and empowerment, then you need to have low power distance.
Not necessarily. If you look at it, see, you also need to distinguish between a national culture and an organizational culture. And like what I've mentioned before, culture is something what you can learn. So when I came to India in 2002, one of the things that I've introduced, I mean, the colleagues who are longer with the organization, Money, for example, I mean, they know the history. When we had the town hall meetings, initially there wasn't a single question. Because if you are standing in front as the, at that point in time I was vice president, people won't question you in public. So then I was used in Germany that we have, let's say in town hall meetings, a number of questions. So then I was wondering, I mean, if we communicate should be something which is bidirectional. So I need to have some questions. Yeah? So initially I said, okay, nobody leaves the room till we have 3 questions and I have time. That works, but not always. And it was then a process over 3 years in principle, how we managed to get questions that people really opened up. That again has to do with established trust and so on and so forth. And then now today, if we have German colleagues and they participate in one of our town hall meetings in India, they are shocked about what kind of tough questions are being asked, because they say, okay, what I've heard about India, people are shy, they won't ask anything. How come that it is different in your organization?
But it means that your new organizational culture is in dissonance with national culture. How this people...
This is the organizational culture that we introduced across our organization.
Yeah, I understand, but for people who live in India, so they have 2 different cultures and need to switch.
They do not have to switch, because like what I've said, it's learned.
I understand.
I've learned German, I've learned English. Ich kann von Deutsch auf English sprechen without thinking much. I can change the language, and similarly if you're, typically yesterday we had one example which I liked in one of the presentations. I think it was this typical what is called Indian yes sir mentality. That was one of the examples that somebody said, okay, Indians, they always will say yes, whether or not it's possible. That's true, but not in our organization.
Yeah, I understand.
And I also say to the colleagues, I mean, I know you're all Indians, to some extent you all have this kind of yes sir mentality learned in your national culture, but the one who I find in the organization, in our organization, it's not accepted. It's a not accepted behavior in our organization. People have understood it. Sometimes you need to hang somebody publicly so that people really understand. But yeah, it works.
Okay, good, thank you.
Just in terms of the culture, I always think of professional culture as being another layer that could go in this, and they sort of interact in a way. So I'm wondering with things like sort of technical reviews, often people are reluctant to criticise because they see it as a personal affront rather than addressing the quality of the work. Mm-hmm. Has that been an area you've worked on, or has that caused any issues?
Not really. I mean, this is the question is, I mean, if you look at the culture, how open are you? And if people feel that they really can openly talk without being punished, that they are also being taken serious, if there are some concerns that the issues are being addressed, it works. And I mean, I have to leave after this talk. I mean, colleagues are still there, both from India as well as from Turkey. So you can ask them how open our culture is, and I'm not there, so then hopefully they will give you an honest answer. But my personal impression is that in our organizational culture, it's accepted to criticize, and we said we want to be a high-performance culture, and high performance I can only achieve if I also accept that there are things that need to be improved and that have to be addressed. The question is always how you say it. I mean, the kind of culture we would like to establish, sometimes I call it a thank God it's Monday culture, so that people really enjoy coming to work, because if you think about, usually there's no other place where you spend as much time as in the office. Not in your living room, not in your bed. You spend most of the time of your life usually at office. So this is why I feel you can only operate, let's say, at a certain performance level if you enjoy what you're doing, that you have fun at work, and if you have the right culture in an organization.
Good. Thanks for an excellent talk. Okay.
Thank you.
So this is a follow-up to the yes question, because I come from a culture of yes. But in that culture, there are nuances. There is yes that means yes, and yes that means no. And I'm wondering if in this relationship between cultures, we have also to train the European culture to understand. Because when I'm talking to my Indian colleagues, they say yes. I know they mean no, because I come from the same culture. So then I probe further, you know?
Yeah, I wouldn't fully agree, because then what you end up with a German that tries to behave like an Indian, and an Indian that tries to behave like a German, and everybody is totally confused. People should really stick to their cultures individually, and of course it helps that you are aware that you can feel, or that an Indian, his yes not necessarily means the kind of yes you're expecting in the US, that you can probe further. But I wouldn't expect, let's say, everybody to change that he mimics the respective other culture. Okay?
Thank you very much. Trying to thanks again. I think you are one of the most important diamonds in Siemens. We have
Thank you.
One for you. Maria is going to give you the
Thank you.
certificate.
Yeah, thank you.
And Alicia is going to give you the award.
Thank you, Alicia. Thanks.